Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the City of Faith Christian Center's Thursday night Bible study live stream on Facebook and YouTube. Welcome to our special event tonight, our second of 3 COVID empowerment sessions. This tonight is your mental health and COVID-19. Do me a favor, if you're on the line with us now, please like, please share, please come in, please say good evening, say hello, let us know you're with us. Find somebody that doesn't normally come to church, that doesn't normally show up for a Bible study, and tell them that we are having a very important and powerful conversation, and they need to be a part of it tonight. Welcome to the city. If this is your first time joining us, we would love to hear from you. Can you please tell us that you're a first-time visitor? If this is your first time, come in and just put first time in the comments, whether you're on YouTube or Facebook. We would love to know that you're a first-time visitor, and we would love to reach out to you following the broadcast just to say thank you so much for joining us. So please, please, please swipe up, swipe left, use your inbox, use your messenger, do whatever you got to do, and let everybody know that we are having a very important conversation, and they should be a part tonight. I don't want to belay the time. I don't want to take up any of your time. We have a special guest with us tonight, but let me give you a little background on why we're here. When we first got into the pandemic and the quarantine situation, being a pastor and being a husband and a father, so many things weigh on your mind when situations change, and when we get into seasons of uncertainty and turmoil, your heart just goes out to people. And I began to pray and ask God, what can we as a ministry do to help people both within our church and those who are not even members of our church to be impacted, to be blessed, and to help in this season. And the Lord told me we should do some COVID empowerment sessions. And so we started with the first one, right? All right. And then that was your money in COVID-19. And we are here tonight for the second one, and it's your mental health. I want to say that just in studying and reading, I heard a statistic that there have been 900 times more calls to the federal mental health hotline or phone number in March of 2020 than there were in 2019. That also prescriptions for antidepressants and anti-anxiety pills are through the roof. They're skyrocketed, which means that some people are out there struggling in this season. And that's pretty much how we got here. And normally it's just me for Bible study, but my lovely, awesome wife, co-pastor Debbie, said, I'm going to be on there with you tonight, and we're going to do this thing together. Would you like to say anything? Say hello.
Just hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm super excited about this evening and the impartation that we're prepared to receive. Like, comment, share. Let us know if you're having questions throughout this event. Go ahead and comment. I am tracking questions, and there will be a good Q&A session at the end of this program. So don't be afraid to ask your questions and ask on behalf of a friend.
Yeah.
Friend. Amen.
So awesome. Thank you so much, Pastor Demi. So we have a really special guest with us tonight. And when we decided to do this, I began to pray, and I asked my wife, like, I don't know who should we get? And she said, I know a super powerful anointed woman that would be awesome for this. And so she reached out to Dr. Shalise McKnight, who is our special guest. You see there on the screen. Say hello.
Hello.
Yeah, Pastor Demi's gonna read some bio, and then we'll get back into it. How about that?
I'm honored to read this bio. Dr. Shalise McKnight is a board-certified psychiatrist, subspecializing in child and adolescent psychiatry. She is a proud native of the DMV area, and she's currently practicing as a school-based psychiatrist for grades K through 6 military dependents. She's an inductee of the Honorary Arnold P. Gold Humanism Society, having received their peer-nominated Humanism and Excellence in Teaching Award, recognizing outstanding humanistic teaching. Regionally, she served 2 years as a representative for the American Psychiatric Association Assembly and has contributed to the intellectual community through 2 peer-reviewed publications, faith-based initiatives, as well as local and national presentations. She attended the University of Virginia for undergraduate studies and has traveled to 20 countries, 10 of them through Semesters at Sea, a nautical study abroad undergraduate program, and Hampton University for postgraduate training. She completed her adult psychiatry training at Cooper Medical School of Roman University and child and adolescent psychiatry training at the Children's National Medical Center in Washington, D.C. as Chief Fellow. She has been married for nearly 14 years. She is a mother to 5 beautiful children and enjoys spending time with her family, playing the piano, singing, traveling, and writing. Now, I introduce to you Dr. Shalise McKnight. Let's welcome her city. I want to see hearts. I want to see love, shout outs. We welcome you, Dr. Shalise McKnight.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So good to be a part of the broadcast tonight. I'm really honored to be able to do this. It's so needed. And I just pray that tonight we're able just to really tap into what the needs are and that the information that's going to be disseminated will be helpful and impactful and implant, just a seed that can grow later.
Awesome. Well, listen, I want to read a small disclaimer and give you some brief ground rules before we let Dr. Shalise run and just give us some great information. So listen, this talk is not endorsed by and or sponsored by Fort Belvoir Community Hospital. All information, ideas, opinions shared are independent of the above entity and supported by Renew 1926 LLC, Dr. McKnight's private practice. There are no financial disclosures to report associated with this. She's here just to be a super blessing. I also want you to remember that this session is for informational purposes only and not intended to replace your own physician's advice. Please consult a physician if you have any mental health concerns, and if at any time you're experiencing thoughts of hurting yourself or others, immediately call 911 or go to the nearest emergency room. And we're also going to share the National Suicide Hotline. You'll be able to see that on your screens throughout the broadcast. So should you need to share that with someone, you'll be able to do so. Ground rules for tonight. Okay, let's listen. We want to have a great conversation. We're going to have space for questions and all that good stuff. But we want you to do something for us. We want you to respect the group. We want you to preserve confidentiality. So if you have questions tonight, ask for a friend.
Yeah.
And call them a friend. Don't say my sister Shanika has this. We don't do that tonight in the comments. Let's keep it general. Let's keep it respectful. And I know that we like to have a good time at the city, but please keep in mind that you never know who's joined our broadcast tonight. And so let's use godly wisdom in how we communicate and how we interact tonight. That is what I'm asking from everybody. And with that being said, Dr. Shalise,
yes,
take it away.
Okay. All right. So let's get started. We'll just kind of jump right into it. When we were talking about formulating just a flow for tonight, one of the things that came up was just what is mental health, because we hear that phrase a lot of times, but I'm not really sure if we're all working from the same definition. So that's where we're going to begin. The objectives for tonight are quite simple. We just want to understand what mental health is, how to recognize the signs and symptoms, and in particular during this COVID-19 time, that's specifically what this talk is around, your mental health as it relates to COVID-19. We welcome questions that are mental health related in general, but this talk will kind of be still focused towards that. And then also the way forward, what do you do? So once you have the information, then how do you synthesize it so that you're able to really integrate that into your life and then be able to apply it? So those are going to be the three main objectives. So let's start with mental health. So Pastor Rue, I'm going to throw it right back to you to ask you, what is your definition? What do you think mental health means?
Okay, so I think in general, mental health is your psychological, your emotional, interpersonal process or well-being overall, right? I think a lot of times when we say mental health, we put a negative spin on it, but it is just the health of your psychological state in those areas, not good or bad, right? It's just the health, and then I guess you get into some people have good health or bad health or whatever you want to call it. So I don't know, is that right?
Yeah, you've been studying, so You get a check.
Oh,
So when we think about mental health, it's good just to kind of break it down, right? So when you look at the word mental and you look at health, health is just really kind of referring to a condition or a state, right? It's not inferring if it's good or it's bad. It's just kind of health in general. And then you have mental, which is mind. And mind is really the seat of everything that is the core and the essence of who we are. So we're talking about our feelings, our senses, our perceptions, how we navigate the world. All of that is your mind. So we're really talking about mind health, but mind health is so integral to just the wellness and the overall being of who we are, even including our physical health. So that's what we're really kind of focusing on. But a lot of times, sometimes it can be difficult to really come to the same working definition because you have a lot of cultural factors, societal factors that come in, things that may seem to be burdensome or traumatic to some are no longer perceived that way just because of maybe historical and social determinants. So that's why it's good for us to kind of level set to say, okay, let's just start mental health, mind health. Okay. And in order to be healthy is now transitioning us to the state of benefits, the good health. And so that's what we really want to be healthy in our minds. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. How's that sound? Yes. Good.
Awesome. Yeah, you're
okay.
Smart. Okay.
Yeah. So the reason why this is really important as it relates to COVID-19 is because our mental health is comprised of not just our thoughts, right? But it's our thoughts, our feelings, our cognition, the way we think about things, our behaviors, and that impacts, how we kind of look at COVID-19. And COVID-19 it came and it really just came to our doorsteps. We didn't really have time to really think about what it meant. And I think in that regard, it has really impacted people in a way that they just don't really understand. And I'm not sure that people have really taken the time to really think about their mental health as it relates to this. I mean, we have had underlying stressors that have probably impacted families and people. But when we think about this, I don't know how many people have really had the time to really sit to think, how has this really impacted my mental health? What changes have I seen, in myself? So that kind of sets the foundation for moving forward, to some of the questions that we discussed.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Right. So like we said in the beginning, right? We know that anytime there's change or especially I would say drastic change and change that happens not just drastically but so swiftly, where there's no time for transition. One day we were at work. I mean, literally for me, I'm a bivocational pastor, and I was in my office one day and got the call that I had the authority to close the office in this region that day, and we haven't been back since, right?
Okay.
I haven't seen the people who I work with except for Zoom calls, no in person, and and then our children were in school one day, out of school the next, and there's these drastic changes. And so I knew that it would impact people. So I guess the first question that I really wanted you to deal with for us is, as a professional, you're out there every day, you're dealing with people, you study this, you understand it, and you see what's going on. So what would you say are the three most important or significant impacts, I should say, to mental health you've seen since this all started? Like, what are the top three things you've seen ripple out?
So this is a really good question because there really has been a particular response since COVID-19 has kind of come into our lives. And so in general, it has just been an increase overall in stress. And like you were alluding to, just managing households in a way that we haven't had to, taking a step back from working the way that we used to, not gathering the way that we used to. So that has created this stress that has just kind of shown up. And what I've seen is that there's been an increase in anxiety, in worry, there's been an increase in depression, and that there's also been a lot of disturbances in people's sleep. And so those have been like the main areas that I've seen it. And I think that it's really important to just take a step back to say, okay, how has this impacted me? How are these things impairing my ability to function, or are they? What mode am I in? Am I in a survival mode of fight or flight, just because I'm just trying to deal? Like you said, many people didn't have time to gather things. They just went from being in a workplace one day, being in a school one day, and then now they're home, so you could walk into places of work or places of education, and classrooms are still set up as though they were having class because they just in one moment had to transition. So that's where I've really seen a lot of the increase in those areas.
Okay. So stress, anxiety. Let me ask you this: how does anxiety and stress, how do they show? I think sleep is one of the things. I tried to study, right, and be prepared. So I heard a young lady earlier today on a video I watched, and she mentioned sleep or lack thereof. And so she talked about the fact that you really don't always know that you're having this issue during the day, because whether you're working from home, the sun is out, you're moving around, you're doing things, but then when night comes and the time to go to sleep comes, you can't. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I'm sure there's some people who are dealing with, they may not think it's insomnia, but they're just up more than they would have normally been.
Yeah, when you said the phrase, when the night comes, that really resonated with me. When the night comes, there's just a lot of things that come in the night, right? A lot of times we have more time to sit with our feelings. There's a stillness that should be there. I know some people are nocturnal and they're still very busy when the night comes, but when the night comes, it's kind of that entry point to thinking about things that maybe during the day we were distracted from. And so when we think about ourselves, and even when we're talking about the mind, we do have a conscious and a subconscious part of ourselves. And so there's always something going on in the background. But oftentimes, I think pre-COVID, we were able to easily distract ourselves by staying busy or doing a lot of things. But now that we're restricted from being able to engage in those things, then now it's surfacing. Some things that maybe you suppressed, or some things that you just didn't pay attention to, now they're surfacing, and they're surfacing in times of stillness, right? So I'm not surprised that at nighttime, that's when there has been increase of these things. And so what can be happening is that there's an anxiety, or there's something that's going on that you're worried about, and it's manifesting itself. Because remember, you have to remember that the body is connected, right? So body, soul, spirit, mind, all of that is connected. So nothing is operating independently. So even if you suppress something mentally, it will come out, so if you have these thoughts that are racing in your mind, it can manifest physically, so that now you're not resting. Now your body is tense. Now it cannot enter into a state of rest. And so now that can impact the onset of sleep. So when you talk about sleep, there's a lot that goes on with sleep. You have primary sleep disorders, and then you have secondary things. So we're kind of talking about secondary impact to sleep that may be caused from stress, mood disturbances, or even these type of natural things that we can't really control. So it can impact how you go to sleep, delaying the onset of sleep. It can impact the maintenance of your sleep. So now you're frequently waking up. It can impact the quality of your sleep. So now you're not rested. So when you wake up the next day, you're tired. Your mood is off. Now you're needing naps throughout the day. So it's a very important thing to pay attention to, because oftentimes when you're looking at mood issues, if you kind of take a step back to explore sleep, you'll really have a better understanding of maybe why there is an exacerbation of the mood.
Okay. I want to insert that. There's a question. I know we're going to do questions at the end, but Pastor, there's a question that came up. I think that's pointed to now. So do you mind?
It does. Can you address sleep paralysis?
Oh, sleep paralysis. So yes and no. So I can address it very high level, because I think it goes a little bit beyond the scope. I would be curious as to the question behind sleep paralysis and what that's evoking, if that's something that's coming from just a trouble in sleeping. But it has to do with the phases of sleep. So you have non-REM sleep and you have REM sleep. And so when you're entering into different stages, or kind of going through these different things throughout the night, it can cause that type of experience to happen. So that kind of speaks to what that is. I would also be curious to how that person is describing sleep paralysis, because again, sometimes we're using words, but we we may not have the same, sort of definition to that. But I would kind of think about more so, have there been any recent stressors that are going on, thinking about the environment that that person is sleeping in, because we have to be mindful of the rooms that we're in, how the room is set up, if it's quiet, if it's not, if it's just something that is comfortable, if it's clean, if it's messy, those things impact sleep. But a lot of times when you're having that sleep paralysis and it's impacting the phases of your sleep, it may be something underlying that's more of a psychological stressor that may come from acute anxiety or something that's kind of coming back up in terms of maybe a trauma or so.
Okay.
Got you. Okay, so I'm loving this. I'm seeing a lot of good comments. People are already being helped.
Okay.
This is helping a lot. This is really good information. If you're on the line with us and you haven't invited anyone yet, now's a good time because every time we go, it's going to get a little bit better, and the information is very important to share with those who might need it. Before we go to the next question, I know that we talked about the stress, right? And there's good and bad stress. Can you talk briefly about stress direct? Because I know, so for instance, a lot of our parents are, some are furloughed, so you have the stress of not working, and now you become a teacher for your children because they're in. Then you've got other parents who are working from home and teaching their children at home. And so you have all these different dynamics that cause stress. Can you just briefly, before we go, talk about stress? Like, how does that look? How do you handle it? What's a good way to deal with these stressful factors that have come up?
Yes. So stress. So when I think about stress, I'm thinking about just a demand. So the National Institutes of Health define stress as the brain's response to any demand. So we all encounter some level of stress every day, right? So even pre-COVID, we were experiencing stress. It may have just been your daily grind type of stress of just, I have to get up, I have to go to work, the kids have to go to school, just those type of things. It may be an unexpected stress where you acutely lose a person. It could be a traumatic. But I think the key thing with COVID-19 and the type of stress that COVID-19 has introduced is that this is not a familiar stress. This is an unprecedented stress. We've never had this stress before. And so when you're trying to navigate stress, oftentimes what's going to help you to get through is your coping skills. And so for adults, that's a little easier because as you live life and you've experienced enough life, you develop coping skills that you can refer back to. So for example, if you fail an exam and you failed another exam later, you kind of know how to cope. It may not take away the sting, but it may help you to get through because you can refer to what you did before. So that's a familiar stress. But the thing with COVID-19 is that this is unprecedented. It's unfamiliar. So you don't really maybe know how to apply your coping skills because you've never navigated this terrain before. So that type of stress, when you place that, and like we said, this showed up just quickly. So people did not really have time to transition. So when you take this unexpected, unprecedented level of stress, and then that overlays with whatever stress was already going on pre-COVID, then you're really going to have something that's really kind of huge. And you have to really sit with that. You have to acknowledge it. That's the first thing, that you have to acknowledge that this is a different time, and you have to give yourself permission to feel this. You have to kind of give yourself permission to even feel a little dysregulated, right? You cannot keep up with just doing things as you proceeded normally because this is not a normal time. We have since kind of buried, or we are bearing as we're grieving, we have lost our normalcy, and now we're in a place where we have to establish a new normalcy. So we're transitioning. So I think all of that just kind of heightens that type of stress. So I think that's how we have to look at it holistically. And then from there, we can tease down, how do we equip ourselves to be able to navigate these type of stress? So in sum, I think it would be important just to understand what type of stress are you dealing with? Are you dealing with a familiar stress? You've been through this, but you're just tired. Are you dealing with an unexpected stress, which is acutely just kind of pulling on you? Or are you dealing with this kind of just huge stress of COVID-19 where you're just, I don't know what to do with this because this is so unknown to me.
This is so good. I really hope you guys are taking notes and you're really listening. I think I think it was powerful. Give yourself permission to feel stress. I think a lot of times we guilt ourselves or we deny trying to have a false sense of power, like, oh, if I act as though nothing is bothering me, then I'm doing well. And I think especially in our church culture.
Yes.
And I know that we touched on that, I think, when we talked the other day, that some
did.
our cultural experiences make us think that denying what we're experiencing or admitting what we're experiencing makes us less of a person of faith.
Exactly.
Can you just, before we move, just that last thing, and we'll go.
Right. So I think there's two things to point out. We definitely have that dynamic from a faith-based perspective, but then also culturally, I can speak specifically to just African-American experience, but I think that it has kind of been taught in some regards that these trials, tribulations, these things that we've gone through, you kind of just pull your bootstraps up and you just keep moving. There's an element of resilience that we're supposed to show. There's an element of push through that we've been taught to work through. And so I think because of that, socially, the constructs of those things from a faith-based perspective and culturally, it has not allowed us to take the time, and it hasn't given us the permission. It hasn't given us the space. And so specifically when we're looking at faith, oftentimes my experience has been when I've had patients coming to me, they're grappling with what they want to identify with because they do feel like it's going to discount their faith. They feel like it's going to make them seem as though they don't have a strong faith or belief in God because they're saying that they are depressed. But I think that there's a difference between acknowledging and then actually identifying with, right? So you can acknowledge that you have these feelings because insight is going to be our first step to wholeness, and insight is going to be our first step to healing. If you don't have an awareness of what's going on with you, you cannot move forward, right? So admitting that is not the harm. The harm comes in overly identifying with that and using that to be a source of who you are. Now I am. You have now said, I am depressed, and you identify with that. Now you're just consumed by it. And please, this is not saying that depression is not real. This is not discounting how debilitating this can be, but this is just to challenge some of the thinking around it, to encourage you to kind of look at how you're receiving, a diagnosis, or maybe denying or pushing it away, just in terms of how do we move from acknowledging how we're truly feeling. And that's the thing. We have to be honest. You have to be honest with how you're feeling so that you can move forward and get the healing that you need.
Awesome. I just want to, so because I heard this and I think this is very, very important. I think you said that coming from, and not just, and I'm sure it's not just African Americans, but sometimes the African American experience has been so hard at times that we begin to think that certain stresses are just normal, even though they're not.
Yeah, exactly. We've just kind of, you've become accustomed to it. It becomes your normal. It's kind of like, I think about a situation where maybe you have a sheltered child, they grow up, and then once they get out into the real world, it's like their eyes are opened, so you don't know what you don't know. You don't know what you don't know until somebody presents that to you, or until you take time to really kind of think about what else can be, the potential of what else. So.
Wow. Awesome. Okay. All right, good. This is blessing me. And we talked before this. Now I'm sitting there like, my God. Okay, so I want to make sure we get everything in, right? So let's go. Another question. So now we've looked at the top 3 things you kind of see impacted. We've talked about stress. We've talked about anxiety. We talked about the cultural differences and how do we how do we understand and not become, as our sister Destiny said, numb to trauma.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this: how can we know if we're experiencing issues in our mental health as a result of COVID-19? How do we distinguish that this is a serious issue as opposed to just a minor problem? How do we know? How do we do this?
Good question. So I think first what you have to do is do a pre and post assessment. So you have to think about, what was my mental health like before? And maybe you didn't think about it because not every person is really in tune to how they're feeling emotionally. But think back to, what was your general state, your general condition? Remember, we talked about health being just a general state, a general condition, mental being the mind. So pre-COVID-19, how did you feel? And then post. But when we're looking at it, I think it's important to think about it in terms of milestones, because I can say that how I felt initially when I first heard about COVID-19 is not the same as how I feel today. You know, some things have gotten better, some things have kind of like heightened, and so there's a difference. But some of the things that I use to look at how I'm feeling is, the first time that I heard COVID-19, what did that evoke? The first time that I heard about the stay-at-home order, the first time that I heard that there was a loved one that I knew that had it. So we can use some of these milestones. When I heard about school closures, when I had to tell my kids that they wouldn't be returning to school, when we had the discussion at work about what does that mean. So those are things that I feel you can use to kind of check, what has your progress been in that regard, and how has it shifted?
Okay. Okay.
So right along that line, if we're assessing COVID before and emotions COVID after, at what point do we realize that it's time to seek some help?
So oftentimes when we're looking at when it's time to get help, we're looking at level of functioning. Okay, and how has it really impacted you? So again, this is going to take a little bit of introspection, and it may draw on just information from other people that have noticed that maybe there's some changes, you know, inside of you. So we're looking at the response. So we have the information that came in. Okay, we hear COVID-19, it is here. China, okay, now it has come and it is literally at our front doors. So what has our response been? Remember, when we're talking about stress, it's going to be the brain's response to any demand. The demand here is COVID-19. And so then we're looking at our response. And then what has been the intensity, you know, of that response? Have there been changes in your worrying? Have there been changes in your energy level, in your level of motivation? If I can just quickly kind of do a mental health roll call and kind of walk you down like some of the buckets, I think it would be helpful, because then it will help you to really understand how much your response has varied from what your baseline is. So when we're talking about anxiety, you can have what's called generalized anxiety, which is more so like the worries in your mind, the what if this, what if that, oh my gosh, all of that. You're just like a worry ward. So you have that. Then you can have the panic part of it, which is coupled with what's going on in your mind, the worries, but now it's manifesting physically. So now my heart is racing. Maybe I have chest pain. I'm feeling impending doom. So there's this marrying of what's going on from my cognitive perspective, and then what's going on physiologically with me. And now I'm having a physical response. Okay. Then you have, you know, a type of it can still be categorized under anxiety, OCD, you know, where you're perseverating, you're just mulling it over, an intrusive thought that you just can't get out of your mind unless it's kind of coupled with a compulsion, an action to do something to lessen what that anxiety is like. And then you can also have like a traumatic component of anxiety, PTSD, where post-traumatic stress disorder, where now you can have disturbances to your sleep. You're having dissociative type of experiences, nightmares, flashbacks. You're feeling like hypervigilant, avoidant. So you have that. Then you have fears, phobias. And I'm just naming these because we want to be mindful that at baseline, some people already had this going on. So when you have introduced now an additional stressor, I can only imagine what it must be like for someone who already was phobic of contamination and germs. And now you have introduced all of these mitigation strategies of social distancing and sanitation and things like that, and how it heightens it. So we got to be mindful of that. Depression. So when we're looking at depression, we're looking at decreased appetite, mood, suicidal tendencies, self-injurious behavior, all of these things, psychotic nature, delusions, paranoia, the list goes on, attention deficit, all of those things. So I think it's critical to have an understanding of how our response is compared to what that baseline is. And so you're looking at the onset, right? So how it's kind of related to COVID-19 is you're looking at, is this acute? Did this just happen? I wasn't feeling like this maybe in January, but since March, April, May, it's just worsened, over time. So I think you're looking at the length of time since that first precipitating factor that was related to COVID-19, and then how it has impacted your response, and then just the level of your response. Maybe it was just that you were sad here and there, but now maybe it's on a daily basis. And now maybe it has even gone to a place that you didn't know it could go. So that's how I think we can kind of gauge our responses in relationship to the COVID-19.
That's good.
Okay. Now, can I ask you this? While we're assessing and we're looking at these different factors, and we hear words like anxiety and stress, and can you talk a little bit about how not just your mental state, but also your body? Because now I love Dr. Caroline Leaf.
Yeah.
I think that she's an amazing Christian and doctor. And I noticed that I see that somewhere written down here. I want you to just briefly, is there a way, what if I'm not the kind of person who's very mentally aware? Catch those? Are there physical triggers that I should be looking for, and things that I'm doing physically, or maybe actions that also help me to assess?
Right. So, excuse me, there are some classic things that are signs and symptoms of our mental wellness and well-being. And yes, Dr. Caroline Leaf, love her, neuroscientist, very faith-oriented. So it's a very good marrying. And she talks more about the neuroanatomy, and understanding our mental wellness from that perspective. So I would encourage you, it's kind of beyond what we can do in our time frame, but I would encourage you to be able, for the audience, to look her up, because she just talks about, like, if the mind's not well, the body is not well. She talks about how our brains, for those of us who, well, I have gone through anatomy class, but for those who have not held a brain, dissected a brain to really understand what it is and what it looks like, when you learn about the brain, you learn about some of the connections of the brain. So it's like highways that are there. And then you learn about the health of the brain. So the brain has these things called dendrites. They kind of look like trees. And so they're important for helping to connect our kind of like these highways that help us when we're firing these neurons and action potentials. They're helping with our memories. They're helping with our feelings, our perceptions, how they're integrated, what they're associated with. So like sometimes if you have a trigger and it takes you back, that might be based on, that connection. And so when we're not well, they have, they're dying. They're dying. They're not healthy. So when you see that tree, it's kind of like how when fall and winter come, the leaves are gone, so it's not as luscious, it's not as full. So that's what's happening. But the powerful thing is that it can be restored. The beauty of the brain is that it's neuroplastic and that it can compensate for injury. So the very thing that is damaged can also be the very tool that can heal, which I think is so important. And so that healing comes through a lot of different things. It can come through reframing our negative thoughts. So being very aware of what our feelings are, but before we get to that action, we're reframing it and saying, okay, yes, I'm sad, I'm depressed, I do want to lay in the bed today, but guess what? I'm not going to. And then you're reframing it, and guess what it's doing? It's strengthening those connections. It's rebuilding it. It's really amazing that something damaged can also be healed by the same mechanism. It's amazing. So that's Caroline Lee.
Right.
That's kind of what
God is amazing how he created us, though, right? I mean,
it is so amazing, how he created us. So I really appreciate, her perspective on that and showing just the synergy. So some of the physical things that you can look for. This is just going to be a whole list of things that are kind of capturing like anxiety, mood, things like that. So depression, you're going to look for a loss of energy, loss of motivation, particularly in things that used to be pleasurable. So activities that you used to love to do, now you're just like, no, used to love to go out and hang out. Now you're like, nope, don't feel like doing that. And it can impact your appetite, where now you don't feel like eating. It can impact even your thought processes. I know sometimes it's uncomfortable, but we have to talk about it because people are having suicidal thoughts, guys. This is like one of the leading causes of death, worldwide. So people have suicidal thoughts, self-injurious behaviors. So sometimes you can actually see the physical manifestations on people's skin of where they've tried to hurt themselves, but not with the intention of killing themselves, but to relieve some of that angst and emotional agony that's going on inside. That's how they feel like they're getting their release. Irritability, aggression, especially for our younger kids who don't have the vocabulary to express how they're feeling, they will externalize. So instead of, they're not able to tell us, oh, this is what's going on, COVID-19 is impacting me like this. No, they're just going to act out. Increased hyperactivity, you can have paranoia, you can have deficits in your attention and your ability to concentrate and to focus. So those are some of the physical things that, and then even with anxiety, you can actually physically see that. You have some people that are just shaking, their legs may be going, they may, just be showing and manifesting that on the outside. And then even just overall, someone's countenance can just be down, and you can just see a change in how they're emoting. So those would be some of the physical things that I would say could be noticeable, that someone could kind of use as signs and symptoms of something else going on.
Okay. I love it. That kind of bridges us to our next question, I would say, because you mentioned our children.
Right.
And, I definitely want to get some time in for questions and answers. And we're approaching an hour. We have time, but I want to give some quality time to children in this conversation, because a lot of us are parents. Some of us are new parents. Some of y'all, no, some of y'all. We got some of
I'm
us.
still in single digits over here.
Right. So some of us have a lot of children. Some of us have a couple. But even right here at the City of Faith, we have newborn babies, toddlers, elementary, daycare, all the way up to high school, right? And so, if you could, because I know this is one of your areas of specialty.
Yes, it is.
What about our children?
Yeah.
How do we engage them? How do we address this with them at the different levels? If you could briefly, high level, I know you can't get into we'd be here all night, right? But just, if you talk a little bit about that, because I know you have a wealth of information and the parents really need this.
Right.
Yes. So in talking about children, I think first we have to take one step back to talk about ourselves, because you cannot have a conversation with your children if you haven't done a self-check on yourself, because our children are very impressionable. And oftentimes, even amidst trauma or abuse, our children still esteem us, and they put us on pedestals, and they look to us for examples. And so if I am introducing something to them out of fear or out of sadness, out of anger, then they're going to absorb that. So the first thing that you need to do before you're even trying to engage your children is that you have to do a self-check for yourself. and see where you are. And if you cannot have that conversation without projecting that, then you have to wait. You really do, or you have to find a different means to do it. Maybe it's not verbal, but maybe giving them an assignment. So as we go through this, it's important to look at it developmentally to do what's appropriate. So for our little ones who don't know much about it, remember we're the gatekeepers of all the information. So what they know is what we tell them. And so you want to be more hopeful. You can explain things to them in a very black and white way, but just not associating it with overly associating it with anything that's going to be negative. I would use like creative means. So for my little ones, what we did is we used a game, and we use a game called, I made it up. It's called Fear, Facts, and Faith. And so what I did is I just asked them about COVID-19 when they hear it, what do they think? And they wrote it down, or they colored a picture for the ones who could not write. And then we had 3 different jars. And what we did is we read the statement, and then we identified if that was a fact, if it was a fear, or if it was faith. And then they threw like a little cotton ball into the jar. And then at the end, we were able to see what jar has the most going on. And so that helped me to really navigate so that I understood, where are my children? Because I don't want to assume that they're scared. And guess what? They're not, because my kids were full of faith. I'm happy to say that. I know that may not be a situation, but I mean, I can actually pull the jars out right now and show you, out of the facts, faith, and fear, the faith jar was almost overflowing. And that spoke volumes to me, because that I knew how to address it, with them, and where I needed to start. That's not the case for all children. Some children may be fearful. And if mine were fearful, that was going to be okay. There was not a right answer. It was just a starting point. So what you want to do is you want to engage them around creative means, not be suggestive, use open-ended questions, invite them into a conversation. And guess what? You don't even have to start with COVID-19. You can easily just start with, how are you doing? How are you? This is a time for us to reconnect, to reestablish rapport, to reestablish a sense of trust. And so this is what you want to do, just to invite them in. So that would be for the little ones. For the adolescents, and this goes all the way through adulthood, you're just checking in. You're using, common language just to kind of gauge. But I think the most important part is to acknowledge, especially for those that are going to have like a loss of celebration or celebratory milestones, graduations, things like that, then we have to acknowledge that. And we have to really applaud our children and really commend them for adjusting quickly, because they didn't have a choice. They really didn't have a choice.
Right.
They had to do it. What else were they going to do? They cannot return to school. They can't graduate. They just had to roll with it. And I'm not sure if people have really sat with that to understand what a big ask that was for our kids. So I think you need to acknowledge that, applaud them, and reaffirm them, and then just instill hope, give them the permission to have a day where they don't want to do their online learning. Sorry, educators, I'm sorry, but it's about wellness, because we don't want to have a generation that's now gripped overly with trauma that they didn't deal with when we could have, when we have time to do it, because we were still trying to press through and be normal. So.
Wow.
That's kind of what I think.
Awesome.
I have a question there. So what about our graduating seniors who may feel some kind of stress or like a traumatic experience, that they're missing out on some of their most memorable moments, like prom and graduation?
Mm-hmm.
What do we do as parents to kind of console those seniors?
So I would say that, one, acknowledge, empathize with that. Let them know that's a normal feeling to have. And you may not understand it, but it's just a normal feeling to have. But we don't want to massage it, right? We don't want it just to become something that's, oh, woe is me. It becomes a pity thing. We are all consumed with it. The world isn't right. Oh, I didn't get this. I didn't get that. It is a loss. It is a loss. And we're going to acknowledge it as so, but at the same time, now we have to shift our thinking into, okay, well, what can we do with this? What do we still have? What gains have we still made? What can we still anticipate as we move forward? And then just kind of putting it into perspective, high level of, okay, this is a season, right? This COVID thing is a season. This is not going to last always. Yes, we will still have loss, unfortunately, of life and things like that, but it's a season. So we're going to get through this. And so we have to kind of focus on that so that this doesn't become the anchoring point.
Oh, wow.
And that we get stuck here. We get
Okay.
stuck in this, and that it opens up a door, it becomes an entry point to everything else that wasn't right.
That's so good. That's such great advice. Good. Okay, so we're right at 53 minutes. Okay, let me do this. I know so one of the questions was about how you can help other people, but you said make sure you're good. Self-check you before you try to help somebody else. Make sure you're mentally sound so that you're not projecting on anybody else. I'm sure listening always helps, right?
Correct.
But I think it's not normalizing or not like supporting somebody going off the deep end, even though you're listening, but you're not like, this is terrible.
We want responsible listeners. We recognize in the mental health field that the people that are truly on the front line are our friends and our family. But we need you, friends and family out there, to understand your limitations and have some appropriate boundaries, and to understand when what is being shared with you is beyond your ability. You can't save everybody. You can't fix everyone. Yes, you can be a listening ear, but you also have to be responsible and understand when you need to refer, when you need to direct, when you need to challenge, right? You can't just always take everything that you hear and just, like I said, massage it. And yeah, girl, that wasn't right. And ooh, you've been through, and 2020 has handed it to you. No, we don't want to do that, because that can be more damaging. So yes, we need to listen. We need to be empathetic, normalize, give the space. Sometimes just offering just a shoulder, right? It doesn't even have to be in our words of trying to give advice. But I think our most important responsibility is knowing when, and the time, like I said, of knowing when to refer and when to redirect them, somewhere else. Got you.
Okay. So this is our last formal question from us, and then we'll just do like some time for questions and answers. And I think Pastor Timmy's written down some of the questions some people have. And I know you had some questions for me, right? Where's Chris? Yeah. So I definitely want you to get that. I don't want to escape my responsibility. Yeah. But let me give it this way: we're going to come out of this eventually, right?
Yes, we will.
And so, personally for me, okay, and if it's okay if I say this, right? Now I miss going out to eat.
Yeah.
I miss going to movies because I'm a movie. I'm just, oh my gosh.
That's my husband.
Right? Well, I mean, it's like every weekend you gotta. So, but outside of that, I'm actually in a really good place.
Mm-hmm.
I find myself able to pour more into my purpose. Less time is spent out and about and in having to run here or run there. And so I'm going to come out of this, and it may be that where some people come out and it's like, yay, I may come out and be like, oh, but other people are going to come out and be like, oh. So what are some of the things we need to prepare for mental health wise as we come out of the quarantine and of this pandemic?
Right. So I think this is a good question, because I think it's really telling on where your mind is. If it's more focused on, how am I going to navigate the next thing? Then you're kind of missing the time period that we're in, which is just to kind of be still and focus on this thing, right? This thing. We're in a pandemic right now, and I'm not sure if people have really taken the time to really realize that, but that's really where we are. So in order to really be able to address what's coming next, again, it comes back to yourself, because that's the only thing that we can anchor. That's the only thing that we have control. And when we ourselves are fortified, meaning our minds are sound, emotionally we are equipped, our thinking is good, the processes in our mind are strengthened and strong, then it almost doesn't really matter what that next thing is going to be, because we ourselves are secure. Right? You can't really weather a storm if you really don't know yourself, because what are you going to use to fight? So this time is a time about preparation. This time is a time about getting to know who you are. You have to know your core values, what's important to you, what's not. You have to, if you're a faith-based person, you got to get strengthened in the word. You got to pray. You got to root and ground yourself. And then you also have to have your tools. So you got to know how you're going to fight and how you're going to survive. So building up your toolkit. So in the process of doing that, then you're going to have to, what are your coping skills? Okay, you got to know that. So when in times of stress, you have to know what is your go-to. You will falter and fall every time if you don't have anything to ground you. So if you listen to music, if you're a writer, if you're a singer, if you need a person, identify them. Let that person know in advance. You are my go-to. I'm going to need you, but you have to do that. And so that's the precious gift of this time for those of us who may not be as directly impacted physically by COVID-19. The gift of this time is preparation.
Okay.
Get your toolbox together so that when the country reopens, you're ready. You're ready for whatever, because it's not the circumstance, it's you. You should be able to feel confident that in whatever circumstance you're placed in, that you're dropped in, that you can survive. Wow. You can survive. But that comes from a healthy mindset and preparation.
Come on and praise.
So this is the mindset that Paul had when he said, wherever I find myself in, I can be content.
Yes.
I mean, that was that power, that was the renewed mind. That
renewed mind, exactly.
Talk about, right?
It's the mind again. Like I said, that we have this precious mind that even when it's wounded, and it is, guys, we've all been wounded by this. We're not going back to a normal. We have to establish a new normal. So we're all in this grieving process, and we have to acknowledge that we're all in a state of bereavement right now because we've lost a lot of things. Right. But the thing about it is that we don't have to stay there. It's a process. Ecclesiastes talks about seasons and times for everything. Right. And this is our time for this, right? And so we don't want to rush to the next thing. We have to sit with this for a little bit and understand what it means. For some, this has been healing. Like you said, you're doing okay. For me and my family, this has been healing. It's given us a lot of time back. It's helped me to organize some things around my house, to get things in order, right? It's given me a lot of things that I need. So I do recognize, the impact that it has, and we are praying for our country, our world, the loss, the people that are in circumstances that are not fortunate, right? We do have upticks in abuse, domestic violence, child abuse, things that are really critical, hunger, basic needs, so I recognize that. But at the same time, I'm still looking at this time of, okay, well, what can I do to make sure that as I move forward, that the change that has come about during this time is something that can be maintained and even impactful in leaving a more positive legacy, for my family, for myself, and for this world.
Awesome.
That's good.
I mean, I really hope you all, this is free. I want you to know that. We didn't charge for this, and this is amazing, powerful. Oh my gosh. So listen, that we got about 20 minutes left, maybe. So I don't want to. I'm not going to ask any more questions because we could do that all night long. There's so much to talk about. I know that you did want to ask us a few things, and so let's go for it. Let's go for it.
Okay, so thank you. I enjoyed that. I really did. I felt like that was just a really good exchange of information. So I'm hoping that it was really helpful. I can't see all the comments right now, but I'm just hoping that it's helped at least one person. Educating one, empowering one, impacting one, educate, and just implementing. But for you,
let me say this, since you said that, and I know you can. Sister Janet Gilmore, she put a post up, and she said, as someone who has dealt with seasonal depression, this conversation is a blessing.
Awesome. Thank you, Janet. I went to college with her. It's a dear friend.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. So we've been seeing, that's the kind of comments that have been coming in. This is good. Thank you for this. This is helping. So that's what people are saying. And so we just want you to know that.
Thank you.
So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's an important conversation. I mean, we're wired for just connection. Right. And so this has been hard. All these, the interesting dynamic is that what has been put in place to help us, to keep us physically safe, like these mitigating strategies that when there's a pandemic, they can enforce. So social distancing, gatherings being canceled, all those things are mitigating factors. And they're to keep us physically safe, but the impact to our emotional well-being, oh, it's been an insult to that. Right. So you have this kind of push and pull to, yes, we need to do this, but at the same time, we also need to be mindful of the impact that it's having. So this is really good to exchange because it normalizes how we're all feeling. We're all feeling a change, because of this. So I wanted to ask more specifically to really kind of ground this to the pastors, just what have you been seeing with your ministry? And then also I've done some faith-based work, which this is my heart, of really marrying together mental health and spirituality, helping pastors and clergymen, congregations, how do you meet the mental health needs, that are within the church? So I just wanted to ask, like, what are your thoughts about bringing that into the church to deliver direct care services? What have you been seeing, in your congregation, your heart and your concerns?
I would say, for the sake, there's a lot, right? There's so many things we could say there. I will say this, for our ministry, I think probably one of the, and I love my young people. I love my singles. I do. But and that's why I'm going to go here. I think that one of the most prevalent things we're seeing in this season is increased feelings of loneliness.
Yeah.
And it's almost like, you know how it was before you were married. You wanted to be married, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you see married couples, and that just reminds you of that desire, which is a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're not only are you single, but you're single and you're forced to be kind of, well, you're alone more. And so there's not that hanging out with the friends or dating, and you're just at home, and it's kind of like magnifying that.
Yes.
And then you have some people who are married and feel alone in this season because the distance in the marriage is magnified now, because where we hid it because we were going to work, now we're at home together, right?
Yeah.
But we're not. Right. What I mean? So can you talk, because loneliness, I think, is one of the biggest things we are trying to help through.
So I think this is really interesting. When you're talking about loneliness, my mind went to, well, why are we lonely? Because loneliness, when you think about it, the main thing has changed is that there's no physical connection, but we've still been able to connect. That's the beauty of being in this technological age, that we've still been able to see each other. So what is it that's really causing us to feel lonely? So then my mind went to, are we really lonely? Or is it really that it's something underlying? Is it something else that we're identifying? Saying that it's loneliness, but it may be something else. So two people living together and now they're lonely, but maybe it's because they haven't had to connect because they've constantly been doing something else. So they don't really have that rapport, that foundation to know how to come together. So maybe it's really not loneliness, but maybe it's a lack of connection. I don't know who this is. Maybe it's fear of, are we growing apart? What is going on? And just a recognition, because that's what's happening, is that now there's been an increased time of awareness. That's what this time is giving us, an awareness. So something may be labeled as loneliness, but it really may not be. But when we think about loneliness, because it could truly be that, then now we have to think about, okay, well, what do I need? Some people say I'm lonely, but it doesn't stop there. You have to think about, well, what do I need when I didn't feel lonely? Why? What was filling my cup at that time? What's missing now? That now I'm saying I'm lonely. Is it just that I'm physically disconnected from somebody, but I can still reach out to them and talk to them virtually? So what is that in between thing that's going from what you have, that disappointment, the expectation and the disappointment? What's in between? That's really causing you to feel that loneliness. So I think that in exploring that, you really have to do a lot of self-identifying and introspection to kind of really say, well, what really is this? Did I overly identify with my work? So now that I can't walk in that every day, now I'm feeling lonely? Or is it an emptiness? What is it? Because it really may not just be loneliness.
Wow. That's so good. Are we misidentifying loneliness? Is a powerful, powerful question. I think that question alone will do a lot to help. And that's one of the biggest things we're seeing. Now, as far as bringing, listen, I think I do a significant amount of teaching on the mind, but I am not what you are, so I don't have the depth of experience and knowledge. So yes, I think that after this, we as responsible pastors, not just us as responsible pastors, but pastors period, right, have to look and say, what are we going to do to better prepare our congregants, our friends, those who we serve, to handle situations like this and to be in a healthy place, not even in a pandemic, just consistently. So we're definitely open to talking about that. I'm interested, are you seeing, I don't know how early you are you seeing great results from the intertwining of faith-based and clinical?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I worked with the local church. I'm just talking with their clergy about their ministry and how they do it. They had a volunteer organization where they had psychiatrists and therapists that may just been congregants, and they were donating their time. But then we just kind of talked about it and formalized the process just around boundaries, because there are definitely things that clerical staff are able to address. But then there is a point. I feel that there is a point that some of those issues probably need to be referred out. And so then the next thing is, okay, well then how do you establish healthy partnerships with organizations in the community, so that at the point that you feel that you need to refer, you can do a safe and warm handoff to a responsible organization, right? And that there can continue to be collaboration, because this is not a replacement to say that the spiritual side is no longer capable of handling a mental health issue. No. But it's a marrying between and an understanding that we all need to work together, right? We're all a part of a community, and we all have our areas that in our lanes. And so if we can still kind of maximize what we do in those lanes and come together, then that's when we're going to start to see changes in our community and changes in our people, right? We're going to start to see the way forward, the way that we want to, where now we're really having progression and generations are changing, and just have that positivity that's kind of going from place to place to place. So it has been very good. There are different structures. Some churches have facilities freestanding that do mental health therapy. I have seen a little more resistance with the integration of psychiatric services, where medication is involved, because I still think that there's a lot of education that needs to be transmitted, to understanding the benefits of medications and their place. But sometimes you just have facilities that are doing therapy. Some facilities that I've seen are doing therapy and medication management. Some are doing it free of charge. Some are doing it with insurance. So it just kind of varies, but I'm just very happy that it's being integrated and that it's being taken very seriously, and that it's exciting to me to see where that's going to be going. So yeah, that's definitely one of my areas.
We got to get on. That sounds like okay.
Sounds like a new birth of an initiative here in the city.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes, awesome.
So let's do. There's some questions, Pastor Demi, I think you have. Is it okay? Can we do some question and answer for a few minutes? You good with that? Awesome.
One question that came in said, "Can you mention what a person can do if they're afraid to speak on their own thoughts and they have a problem admitting that they have a mental health issue?"
Absolutely. So I don't know if the fear is admitting it to oneself, or if the fear is acknowledging and admitting it to another person. Either way, write it down. Write it down. Sometimes we don't have to do everything verbally. Sometimes it can just be a written expression. Write it, put it in a journal, mail it, do whatever you need to do. But it doesn't have to be where it even comes out in whole. Sometimes it's just a part. I have, and this is just being transparent, I have so many journals, and sometimes it could just be a one word of just, I feel this, or a sentence. It doesn't have to be the whole thing, right? Sometimes that's the overwhelming part of, now you think you got to write your whole life story, the whole narrative. But that's not true. That's a myth. You can just acknowledge just maybe what you're feeling in this moment or what you felt in the past. But the important thing is just to start, so that it doesn't accumulate, because the truth of the matter is that it doesn't go away. You start to leak. You'll become leaky. If you don't acknowledge these things, they become all consuming. And so you may think that you're able to keep it moving, but it's going to come out. And it may come out in irritability. It may come out in emotionality. It may come out in aggression. It may come out in indifference, but it will come out if you don't acknowledge it.
Awesome. Another question was, how should someone who's been on full medication deal with canceled appointments and a lapse in medication?
Okay, let me repeat it so I can make sure I understand. So it sounds like someone was on medication, had some missed appointments, and then now needs to.
Under COVID, appointments have been canceled.
Okay, and no longer on medication and needs it?
There's been a lapse and they need it.
Okay, so one.
Any recommendations?
Yes, you can call your doctor. So call the doctor. So right now, I know a lot of places are doing virtual visits. So they may not be using the traditional go to the office. But for a lot of times, the thing is, if you're sick, the doctors are going to see you. Because I know I haven't heard of one facility to have people in private practice and hospital, inpatient, outpatient. And if you're sick, they see you, so for us, we're bringing people in. It depends on the level of severity. I need to go in to see the patients that are most acute, but then I have the discretion to provide the virtual. So I will call the doctor to see if they're willing to give an appointment. There has been a lot of grace given because of COVID-19. So some of the restrictions or some of the policies, that may have been in place with no shows and cancellations, some, providers do have a discretion. It's at their discretion if they want to re-engage. If not, primary care doctor. Go to your primary care doctor if you can't see your specialist. That's what they're there for. They're frontline. They're supposed to be helping with all of those things. Get in with your primary care doctor so that if that medication is needed, you can restart it. Please do not restart your medication on your own without seeking medical advice, because there can be adverse effects to that. And a myth is that you go back on it, you can have the same effect. And sometimes things change in the interim. So just be mindful. We don't want you playing doctor out there, okay?
Awesome. Yeah, definitely. Can you speak on mental health and coping with the loss of a loved one in this season?
Oh, that's hard. The way that we've had to mourn, that is hard. Yeah, so that's hard because we've never been through a time where we've had to have restrictions on the number of people that can go, or that we can't even go to get closure, or that we're doing virtual funerals. So that's really difficult. The coping is you have to feel it. You have to feel it, and you have to let those emotions, kind of go. But then I think it's more so just on making sure that you have a solid support as you're going through it, because it's a layered situation again. You have the normal process of loss, grief and loss, but then now you're layering on the COVID-19, which is enforcing the restrictions that have never been present, as you're kind of going through this. So I think it's important to make sure you have support, to acknowledge, how you're feeling as you're moving through your grieving process.
Great. Just two more. What are signs that you have unresolved trauma in your life?
So that's good, because you can have a lot of different types of trauma, and it can come up in different ways. The classic ways that you'll see, according to diagnostic criteria, are going to be through flashbacks, right? So you may have a flashback of something that happened to you. You may have a nightmare. You may have avoidance. So maybe whatever that thing was that happened, you're avoidant to be around certain situations that may trigger that, hypervigilant, just easily nervous, startled, or scared. And then I think a big one is that you just don't have peace. You just don't have peace. You just feel, there's just always that something, and you don't feel that peace and comfort. Yeah. So that, because sometimes we can have things that have happened to us, trauma related, that may not be so obvious. Okay, we have a lot of obvious types of trauma, abuse and things like that. But, trauma is a spectrum. And you could have some things that may not be traumatic to me, but because of how it was delivered to you, it could be very traumatic. And those things could be subconscious and you may not even know why. It could be manifesting in how you're eating, you're overeating, your sleep is terrible, your mood is just always awful. And you don't even know what it's linked to, but then you just always have that feeling of unrest, of unease, no peace, so for the believer, we know what to do with that. You need to pray. You need to ask the Lord to reveal that to you so that you can have an understanding of what is going on. But let me correct myself, because sometimes it's not even about the understanding. It's about the closure, because sometimes you'll never know why. You may never know that thing, so sometimes it's just about praying to get the closure and the healing so that you can move forward, because sometimes you don't even want to open that Pandora's box because it could be more detrimental. So sometimes you just want to keep it closed, ask for the healing, get the peace, and then move forward.
Right. You may never get the apology.
You may never get it.
So
what are you going to do if you don't get it? What are you going to do if you don't get it?
Right.
Yeah. You may never get it. Yeah. You just need to get the resolve and move forward.
That's another one of those things where it's like about you in the situation, right? Because if the people, they could be dead.
Right.
How can a dead person ever say sorry?
Exactly.
They could just never admit their responsibility. But you have to find a way to move on in life.
To find your resolve.
And that's not just preacher talk. That's like real clinical. I mean, that's real advice.
Yeah. And that's even therapeutic, because there are types of therapy where it's like you move forward. You don't need to go back to uproot everything. You can just kind of, from this point in time, just kind of move forward, equip yourself with the coping skills, acknowledge it happened, move forward. Because like I said, for some, you have to be in a particular mindset to be able to deal with your trauma. You just can't deal with it at any time. If you're not mature enough in your mind, if you're not stable enough, if you have a fragile, immature mind, then when you're trying to open up this trauma, it's not going to be restorative. It's going to be damaging. So if you're not at that point, then maybe the better thing is to stabilize you as a person, your core, your values, your person, physically, emotionally, mentally, equip you, and then move you forward.
So the questions are pouring.
Yeah, we only have 10 minutes left, right? So here's what I want to do.
Part two,
definitely. Yeah. But I want to ask this. I think this is a very important one, and then I'm going to ask our closing question, right? And okay. It's pointed for now. So somebody asked if they wanted to seek counseling, what are good resources? And I know, so since we haven't started the City of Faith's counseling referral program yet, what are some good places to start with Dr. Shalise?
Right. That's a good question, right? That's a really good question, because counseling is good, but not all counseling is created equally, and not all counseling is the same. So there are different types of therapy, so you can have individual therapy, you can have group therapy, you can have family therapy, trauma-based therapy. There's just so many different types. So I think the first thing to identify and the question to ask yourself is, what do you need therapy for? What do you think you need it for? Is it for yourself? Is it for a dynamic that's going on in a relationship? Like, what is it? And what are you trying to accomplish? Then I think that will direct you. For those who may not know how to navigate, you can always use your insurance company. They have websites too that have the therapist on there, and you can read like a little bio to see if you engage. And then you can always do a consultation. So I think that's what kind of takes the fear out of it, of just meeting with the provider and then seeing, because the key to having a good therapeutic experience is having a solid therapeutic rapport with your provider. So you have to be able to engage and have a level of trust and build a good rapport, or it's not really going to work. And so that you can kind of pick up. We're all kind of intuitive. So, at the point that you have your consultation, you can kind of gauge whether or not you feel that will be effective, or you can just try it. There's no harm in just trying it and then making a decision. So you can start with your insurance company. You can ask around, if at your church, somebody knows somebody to put you into contact with, but you just want to make sure that where you're going, the people are credible, that they have experience, that they have good track records and reputations, right? You just don't want to entrust your life and your vulnerabilities just to anyone just because you need help. The first step is acknowledging, and we applaud you for that. But then we also want to put you into the hands of someone who can really be responsible and stewarding you to a place of wellness.
Awesome. That's good. Every answer is slow. So good. Last question of the night. And no, it is not a COVID-19 question, but it is very timely and very relevant to what we are experiencing as of right now. And I know everybody probably that's on the live and all of us here are aware of the current situation with Brother Ahmad Abu. And hearts go out to his family. Go out to all of those who've been impacted directly. But I want to ask you, how can we, as African American people, as parents, young boys and girls, even as myself, I'm an African American man who jogs in my neighborhood, or I walk and still trying to get to the job place. But how can we, in a healthy way, deal with the rage, the anger, the disappointment, the fear that these repetitive situations keep bringing to the surface? And I know you can't answer and solve it for us all, but some good, healthy tips, if you can, on how we can address this.
Oh, yeah, it's very sad, very unfortunate, another loss, unnecessarily. And yeah, so I think like we've talked about all throughout this night, of just first acknowledging and allowing yourself to feel the emotions. There's nothing wrong with us feeling what we feel. It's just that we have to do something with those feelings, right? We can't allow it to impact us to the point where our functioning is severely impaired, or it's causing even more unrest or even more injustice, but maybe fueling that into something that is productive, educating. There's a fine line between wisdom and fear, of the wisdom of okay, how do you equip our young Black men of the reality of what they're going in without evoking fear? How do you pull over if you've been stopped by the police? Like, what do you do responsibly, out of wisdom, but then not because you're scared? It's a really slippery slope. And I think that that's still evolving with what that really looks like. I just kind of have to default to just wisdom from the Lord and what he gives us and the guidance that he gives us, and us supporting and not even just as an African American community, but for those who are like-minded, just coming together as a community and in places where we can advocate, that we're using our voice, our feelings, and we're fueling that in order to be able to make change that's impacting policy, that's educating communities that may have a differing view. I think all of those things are things that we have to consider, when we're looking at such devastating things that have just become just unreasonable. These are things that we shouldn't have to continue to hear, or to fear if we're just walking in neighborhoods or jogging. But unfortunately, it has become the reality of this country.
Wow. I said today I do a Psalm a day live every morning, Monday through Friday, and I dedicated it to this conversation today. And I wanted to express to our brothers and sisters who are angry that we still have a responsibility to own our response.
Exactly.
And to not forget who we are in the face of something like this. And because a lot of times when we do that, our response becomes the least beneficial and the least productive to ourselves and to those around us.
Exactly.
Yeah, and
exactly.
I think
yeah,
that. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh no, I was just thinking when you said response, I was thinking about reactions and responses, and how reactions, when we're impulsive and we're not thinking and we just boom react, that those are the things that are going to make the situations worse, for us. But when we can respond, Responses take time. You have to synthesize, you have to think, you have to put things together and integrate them so that you can have an appropriate response. And those are things that we can be working on. What is our response going to be? And then just being mindful of what our reactions are.
So respond responsibly.
Yes.
That's fine. That's good. And we have, I like to say this, we have responsibility. We have the ability to respond, and therefore we are responsible for how we respond.
Yes.
And we can't give that away and give that ownership to somebody or something else. We got to kind of hold that. But I mean, that's mental well-being, is to hold that respect. I mean, it seems to me.
Yeah. This is so good.
I could do this. Oh God. Okay. So listen, I want to say thank you to you tonight, Dr. Shalice. Yes. I feel like this has been super impactful. It has been for us, I believe, and for so many of the people who I see commenting. And I just know that some of the things you address, some of the people I know personally, is going to really really bless them. And if they apply it, it's really going to help them a lot. I want you to pray us out tonight.
Oh, awesome! Yes.
Prayer, but before you, I want Pastor Demi. Do you have anything else you want to share? Anything else you want to say in closing? Because I'm just.
I think so much has been said in this area and on this platform, and I think this is something that we need to continue to engage in because it has been such a silent conversation for so long. So it's time to bring it to the forefront in the Black community and the church, that your mental well-being is very, it's a problem. It's something that needs to be addressed, and it's not something that we should just overlook and say take it to the altar and it's settled there. Sometimes there's more that needs to be dealt with internally, and I think it's a healthy marrying, like you said, of the mental health community and the ministry as well. So I'm looking forward to collaborating with you.
Yes, I am too.
Doing this again, and then establishing something more concrete moving forward. We'll only be the better because of it.
Yeah. You know what? DJ just made Donald Sims, our DJ. Here's a really amazing suggestion, and we got to talk after this. He said maybe we should do one of these for kids and teens.
That is a really good idea.
I think that's so powerful that we have to talk, and let's see what we can do. Good idea. You know what I did?
Yeah, but I think this is really good because mental health, this pandemic is as much a mental health pandemic as it is a physical one. But I think because mental health has tended to be covert, it's tended to be very stealth-like, invisible, that it often goes unaware. So I hope that this brought some insight into how to recognize it, and how to increase our ability to check in on one another for our internalizers, how to probe, how to observe people, so that we can be more responsible, as we go forward. So, okay, you ready? We're gonna pray.
Pray.
All right.
Let's do it.
Dear God, we thank you so much, Lord, just for an opportunity to come together, just to support one another and to talk. We thank you that we can exchange information. And we just pray, Lord, that in the name of Jesus, that the information would be solidified and that people would begin to be able to take it and to implement change. We thank you, God, just for how communities are going to be built up. We thank you for how lives are going to be restored, healing, wholeness, improved moods. We're just really thankful for each other and for this time. And we pray protection over everyone, over this ministry. Bless them, Lord. Bless them for their hearts to even want to have this discussion. And we just thank you for opportunities to be able to advance one another. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Listen, everybody that joined us tonight, we appreciate you so much. We love you guys so much, and we hope that this has been impactful and life-changing for you. We're going to do it again. We're going to try to get something together for the teens and all that good stuff. Do me a favor. like and still share the replay, please tag Dr. Shalise. Send her post some thank yous on her page. Show her some love because she really poured out and did a lot to prepare for this. And we're gonna find a way to pay her, even though she won't let us. We have to find a way. She just wanted to be a blessing to people, and we need more of that. We need more of that. And so thank you all. We're gone. God bless you. We hope this has been a blessing to you. And yeah. Welcome to the city. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you. Good night. Thank you, guys. Bye.
Bye.